What is up, Iwu crew? Today, we are going to be covering 5 bone-chilling stories of people who met their demise in the wilderness. Those who have had a scrape with Mother Nature know exactly how merciless she can be, even on her best days. That's to say nothing of her worst days. The worst part? Because you are out in the wilderness, it might be a long time before someone finds you, if ever. There are millions upon millions of acres of undeveloped public land in the United States alone. Even if the friends and family of a missing hiker generally know where their loved one was going, finding their remains is like finding a needle in a haystack. You die alone, knowing that the most likely outcome is that you remain out there, all alone, forever. Let's take a look at 5 stories of people who met this terrifying fate. First is the story of Jordan Grider. There is no more extreme form of camping than snow camping, and doing so in Minnesota, one of the coldest states in the US, is no joke. But Jordan Grider thought he was up to the task. Grider was described by his family and friends as unconventional. At merely 29, he had spent more than a decade living alone in the forests of New York and Kentucky. His mother even said that Jordan never considered himself to be homeless, that his home was the outdoors. So if anyone knew how to handle themselves in the wilderness, it was Grider. Growing up in New Mexico, he'd become familiar with some of the most extreme weather and environmental conditions from a young age. As he got older, Grider lived and worked among Mennonites in New York, grew his own food, and became fiercely independent. He decided to go to Minnesota to be closer to his mother and Lake Superior. By doing this, he would also have access to the perfect place to try winter camping. So, as 2018 came to an end, Grider packed up his pickup with a few supplies and made his way to Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. When he arrived, he parked at a private gate on the Sioux Hustler Trail, where his truck would be found abandoned later on. The last bit of proof that Grider was alive was from a purchase made on October 10th. Sean Williams, a conservation officer, eventually stumbled upon Grider's camp more than 6 months after Grider was last seen alive. What was about to be uncovered was anything but ordinary. At the time of the discovery, the camp was covered with 2 feet of packed snow. The authorities had to wait for the snow to melt before they could properly search the campsite. But once they did, they came to witness a shocking scene. There was a pistol and several sheathed knives among Grider's possessions, and for shelter, there was only a hammock with a tarp covering it. There was blood everywhere.
They had found an empty camp with blood in the tent and hammock and sleeping bag, and they had found a few bones at that time.
And upon further inspection, the Border Patrol agents who accompanied Williams found that the hammock was saturated with blood. By the end of the search, they only recovered 12 bones, the last of Grider's remains. Based on where he was discovered, Williams believes that he walked along the south side of one of the mountains and made camp to shield himself from the freezing north winds common to the area. Of the camp itself, he said, "It's in a super remote place. If you were looking for a spot to avoid contact with people, he really did find it." Foul play was quickly ruled out since there were no signs or proof that another person was involved. When authorities brought up the possibility of Grider taking his own life, his family balked at the idea. They said he was the kind of self-sufficient, independent person who would not entertain such thoughts. and there was nothing at the scene to indicate this possibility. His gun was tucked away, not missing a single round, and none of his knives had been taken out of their sheath. And then, of course, what would have happened to the rest of his remains? With the questions growing, Grider's family offered the idea of wolves attacking him. Thomas Gable, a researcher at the University of Minnesota who studies wolves and how they hunt, doubts this in the case. He says that if wolves were involved, it would be the first case of wolves attacking and killing a human in more than 200 years. For this to have happened, the wolves had to be starving. Even with this, they would have had to watch Grider over days or weeks before attacking, taking that time to determine the best way to snatch their prey. Besides, there likely would have been something else wrong with them, such as deformed jaws or rabies. Gable says that wolves are afraid of humans and have learned to stay away from us. But he also says that a pack of desperate, starving wolves would have no trouble ripping a person out of their hammock and tearing them apart. The thought of Grider, out there alone, being stalked by a pack of wolves, is a terrifying one. Equally terrifying, however, is the thought that it might not have been wolves. If he wasn't murdered by another person, hadn't been devoured by animals, hadn't taken his own life, then who or what is to blame? Williams and the Border Patrol offered a fourth option. He did end his own life, but unintentionally. They observed that his knives were incredibly sharp. Could he have accidentally severed an artery while shaving or whittling wood for a fire? Maybe he bled out, and after he died, his body was picked at by scavengers. It's a plausible explanation, except for one detail. All of his knives were checked for the presence of blood to indicate this, but none was found. To this day, the cause of his death remains a mystery. Next, the story of Dustin Self. The novel Into the Wild is a heartbreaking one. It tells the tale of Christopher Johnson Mccandless, a young man who abandoned his life in Virginia, gave away his college fund, and disappeared into the Alaskan wilderness. It is believed he survived over 100 days before he died from eating a poisonous wild potato, despite carrying a field guide that detailed which wild produce was safe to eat. This book has long been a staple of high school literature classes. It's a tragic story of selflessness and adventure. So, Dustin Self's friends and family weren't surprised that the story struck a chord in him. 19 years old, and having grown up in sleepy Piedmont, Oklahoma, had him yearning for an adventure, for something different. But unlike Jordan Grider, Dustin was not an avid outdoorsman. He was much younger, with little camping or hiking experience. So, when he told his parents in mid-March 2013 that he was going to Oregon to camp by himself for a month, they tried to talk him out of it. But, despite his inexperience, Dustin was determined to make the trip. His mother said that he had recently watched the 2007 movie adapted from Into the Wild and had become obsessed with the idea, despite the film protagonist's sad fate. He struck out from Piedmont in his pickup, taking a few supplies with him. His family knows he made it to Oregon because only a few days after he left, they got a call from the owner of a gas station in Harney County. The owner said that Self had bought a few gallons of gas and asked him for the fastest way to get to Steens Mountain, since his GPS took him way off track. The following Monday, a rancher reported an abandoned pickup on his property. It seems that it had slid off the road and was stuck.
On Monday, Self's car was found off Stonehouse Road. by local ranchers. Authorities plan to resume the search for Self by air. If you have any information regarding this case, you're asked to contact authorities.
Inside the car, the police found the keys to the truck, a GPS, a laptop, and some camping supplies. Self, however, was nowhere to be found. Authorities contacted Self's parents. At first, they were unworried. They assumed that he had simply left his truck, took the supplies he needed, and was camping somewhere. That soon he'd turn up. But as time wore on, it became clear that Self was not just camping. He didn't have enough supplies to last him the full month he had planned to camp, and his parents knew that he would be reluctant to hunt for food since he was a vegetarian. That's when Self's ex-girlfriend, Tyler, came forward. This is where the situation takes a bizarre turn. Apparently, he'd texted her that he was lost, didn't know where he was, and that he was seeing things, such as uprooted plants running around. Then, he called her. Tyler was waiting at the airport, about to get on a plane with her parents, when she saw Self's name on her caller ID. And when she answered, Self told her that he was driving around a town, trapped there. He didn't know how to leave. She recalled, he said there were devil worshippers at every gas station that he stopped at to get help, and that all the plants and animals were dead everywhere, and he was trying to bring them back to life. He was really upset and really scared. And then the line went dead. But when the Oregon police pulled Self's phone records, they found that he hadn't been anywhere near civilization when he made that call. And then things got even stranger. In addition to wanting to live out his own into the wild adventure, Self had told family and friends that he was also hoping to find a pair of chapels out there in the Oregon wilderness that belonged to a specific church, one that supposedly used hallucinogenic mushrooms in their rituals. That phone call to Tyler was the last anyone heard from Self. Over 6 months later, his remains were found by a hunter who had been tracking a deer through the forest near Burns, Oregon. Self had taken off his clothes, crouched down in a thicket of aspen trees, and then died. He never even set up camp. Immediately, speculation began to swirl. Had the strange call to Tyler been a result of hallucinogens? Had Self actually found the churches he was looking for? Or had he simply bought drugs off of someone in the area, taken them, and had such a bad trip that he ended up dying of exposure in the Oregon wilderness? Self's ex-girlfriend didn't think so. They may not have been dating anymore, but they still talked every day. She knew him better than anyone, and she had seen him slip in paranoia before. She had seen him use too many of his prescription drugs and begin to lose grip on reality. And while his parents reported that Self was obsessed with Into the Wild, Tyler knew that he was much more interested in Human Race Get Off Your Knees, a book chronicling conspiracy theories. He'd read the book and decided that he wanted to get off the grid. He didn't just want to have an adventure, he wanted to disappear. And that's exactly what he did. Whether by choice or by accident, Self fell off the grid. So far off the grid that when he needed help, when he was shivering, alone, and cold in the early spring night, he could not ask for it, and instead succumbed to the elements and merciless wilderness. The next story is about another young man whose obsession with Into the Wild likely led to his death, and his name is Jonathan Kroom. In late August 2013, 18-year-old Jonathan Kroom made his way from Arizona to the Oregon wilderness. In the months leading up to his disappearance, Kroom watched the 2007 adaptation of Into the Wild over and over. While neither the book nor the movie are explicit about Mccandless's death, there has been constant discourse online about whether or not he intended to take his own life by eating that poisonous potato. Kroom seemed intrigued by the story, by a man taking control of his own life, even if it ultimately meant dying. That if it happened on his own terms, it would just be another way of taking control. Kroom had texted a friend before he left that he wanted to disappear, that he wanted to leave his current life behind. He had just gotten out of a relationship, and both his family and friends reported that he was despondent. He told his father that it would be great to just live penniless and just work along the way and get resources like they did in the movie. But that is only half the story of Into the Wild. The longer Mccandless lived off the land, the more discontented he became. He wanted to return home, but feared that he ruined his own life by taking the steps he took to remove himself from society. Kroom seemed to only key in on the first part of the movie, where Mccandless works his way across the country and sets himself up on a remote patch of land. He was obsessed with the idea of finding himself. But looking at the facts of the case, it seems more likely that he was simply depressed. He was young but already tired of living, and the dissolution of his relationship was enough to push him over the edge.
John Kroom says his son is a big fan of the movie Into the Wild.
Apparently once a month he's been watching this video of Into the Wild, this movie about a guy that drops everything and takes off. And he's apparently been fascinated with this.
18-year-old Jonathan Kroom's car was found in Riddle, Oregon last week.
His identification, his money, everything he had with him was still in the car.
John says he left Phoenix, Arizona to go for an adventure.
I text him every day, please call. I'm looking for you, please call. Nobody knows where he's at.
Maybe he didn't intend to hurt himself when he went out there, and just wanted a breather from his life in Arizona. He would be found dead less than 1,000 feet from where he parked his SUV near Riddle, Oregon, just 2 days after he was supposed to start college. Because Jonathan was not an avid camper and hadn't brought any camping supplies with him, it seems unlikely that he really was going to emulate Mccandless's ill-fated sojourn into the wilderness. Instead, it seems that looking out into the deep, dark thicket of trees, Jonathan let himself believe the lie that this was a good time and place to meet his end. Our fourth story is about Jim Carter, whose disappearance remains unsolved, a mystery over 50 years old. Anyone who has spent more than a few nights in the woods understands why someone could believe in a creature like Bigfoot. Even the most familiar forests are filled with strange noises and shapes. There are infinite places to hide. While many believe it is impossible for a Bigfoot to be hiding in the American wilderness, there are many others who think that the creature is real. Jim Carter's disappearance in May 1950 is perhaps one of the first and most famous stories of a person's disappearance connected to what they called, at the time, the Apes. A climbing party had just made it to Ape Canyon near Mount St. Helens when they all started to feel that something was off. Despite being some of the most experienced mountaineers in the country, the canyon had a terrifying electric atmosphere that no one could explain. It was like someone was watching them. But they climbed Mount St. Helens anyway, starting out early on that day in May 1950. On their way down, Carter told the group that he wanted to ski around the other side of the mountain so he could get a good shot of the other 19 skiers as they came down and out of the timberline. He planned to meet up with them in less than an hour, but Carter never rejoined the group. Figuring he had simply gone on ahead of them, the rest of the group returned to camp, but Carter wasn't there either. Now, fearing the worst, they split into groups and began their search. It was only a few hours later that they found something terrifying. A film box at the spot where he was supposed to have taken their picture. Then, they followed the tracks from his skis down the mountain. Carter was an experienced skier and mountaineer, and the group became worried as they followed his trail. He had jumped upwards of 3 perilous crevasses, and the speed he would have needed to make those jumps was incredibly high. The group knew he would never take the kind of risks these tracks showed he did, at a speed he would never let himself reach, not unless there was good reason to, such as being pursued by something. When he reached the rim of Ape Canyon, he should have stopped, but he didn't. His tracks showed that he actually skied down the wall of the canyon. And as the group followed his trajectory with their eyes, expecting to see his broken body at the bottom, they were surprised to find nothing below. At this point, the climbing party called in reinforcements. By the end of the week, there were more than 70 people in Ape Canyon and the surrounding wilderness looking for Jim Carter. Yet, there wasn't even a hint of where he might be. But locals have their suspicions. There have been many reports of hikers and campers being attacked by apes in the area around Mount St. Helens, including an entire Boy Scout troop. It seemed likely to them that Carter, after taking a shot of his fellow skiers, looked back and saw one or more of these mountain devils. Terrified, he began skiing for his life. The climbing party finds it hard to believe that Carter would have taken that track by accident, or that his remains would not have been found at the end of the line. To them, that speaks of some greater evil lurking out there in the trees, something that would have chilled Carter to the bone, a creature that possibly caught up to him as he careened down the side of the cliff and landed at the bottom, likely wounded and exhausted. The last story is that of Geraldine Largay, a 66-year-old woman who vanished into the wilderness and left behind something absolutely chilling. The Appalachian Trail is one of the most heavily trafficked and well-defined in North America, with about 3 million people hiking at least a portion of its 2,168 miles. Only around 20,000 people have hiked the entire length of the trail. Geraldine Largay wanted to be one of those hikers who achieved the whole trail. She admitted to having a poor sense of direction, but even at 66, she was a hardy, small woman. She was accustomed to hiking, even though the trail name she'd received during the first 1,000 miles of her hike, Inchworm, belied how slow she was. On July 22, 2013, Geraldine Largay stepped off the Appalachian Trail to go to the bathroom, but she could not find her way back. She found herself completely lost, unsure which way she had come from or which way she should go to get back on the trail. But Largay didn't panic. Instead, she texted her husband, George, who was only 22 miles away and waiting for her where the trail crosses Route 27. Because the trail was so long and Largay was not able to carry enough supplies for what was sure to be at least 6 months on the trail, her husband had agreed to meet up with her at specific junctures in the trail to make sure she was okay and to help her resupply. The text she sent read, "In some trouble. Got off trail to go to BR. Now lost. Can you call AMC to see if a trail maintainer can help me? Somewhere north of Woods Road. XOX." Since there is no cell service on the Appalachian Trail, George never received the text message. It never even left her phone. She made for higher ground, hoping that she would catch a bar and send the message to her husband. She tried 10 times to send it, with no luck, before deciding to give up for the night, make camp, and try again the next day. The second text was a little bit more serious, but still not panicked. It read, "Lost since yesterday. Off trail 3 or 4 miles. Call police for what to do, please. XOX." While George still didn't receive the text, his wife was late to their scheduled meeting, so he contacted the trail wardens. A massive search began. Police questioned hikers as they crossed the Route 27 junction and combed through the trees with canine units. They even tested a Band-Aid they found for DNA to see if it possibly matched Largay's. To her husband, the wardens, and the police officers, it was as if Largay had evaporated into thin air. But Largay was very much alive, and she was following the old cliché advice given to anyone who enters the wilderness. If you get lost, you need to sit down and stay put. Where she made camp on that first night was where she stayed for the next 26 days, as her food dwindled and her fear grew. She tried to make herself visible. She tied a reflective blanket between a pair of trees. There was evidence later that she had tried to light a couple of trees on fire, hoping that the smoke would attract attention. She documented not just how much food she had left, but her anxiety about that food supply, and what would happen when it ran out, in a little black journal. She wrote about her attempts to orient herself. Fellow hikers who had interacted with Largay before her disappearance later reported that she was particularly bad at using a compass and a map, which her entries in the journal confirmed. The last full entry is dated August 6, 2013. It reads, "When you find my body, please call my husband, George, and my daughter, Carrie. It will be the greatest kindness for them to know that I am dead and where you found me, no matter how many years from now. Please find it in your heart to mail the contents of this bag to one of them." She knew she was going to perish, and clearly expected a fellow hiker to find her remains. There is one last thing written in the notebook, under the date of August 18th. It only read, "George, please read. XOXO." If that date is accurate, she had survived for nearly a month. When she was found in October 2013, the picture of her last days was a heartbreaking one. The camp she had made was impossible to see from the air. There was a clearing less than a mile away that, if she had made camp there, would have allowed her tent to be seen by searchers in helicopters and low-flying planes. The camp was a 25-minute walk from a logging road that would have taken her back to the trail or to civilization, whichever direction she would have followed it. If she had walked just south of her camp, the trees would have cleared and she might have been able to get her bearings. There are many questions surrounding Largay's last days. Why didn't she hear the search parties? Why, after 2 weeks, when it was clear that she was not going to be found if she stayed put, didn't she attempt to again find higher ground or one of the many intersecting trails that led to the larger Appalachian Trail? Why were her remains found with water bottles still containing water? But those who know the dense woods around the trail are not surprised. This area of Maine is frequently used by the military for training exercises, specifically because of how dense the trees are and how easy it is to get lost. So, if you're planning on going hiking this weekend, make sure you stay safe and keep to the trail.